Dad, I think someone found us. The child's whisper stopped Grant Whitmore halfway down the stairwell at 2:13 in the morning. Grant had been working late at Whitmore Development Headquarters, and with the executive elevator temporarily shut down for maintenance, he had taken the stairs from the 23rd floor. He expected an empty concrete passageway, not the frightened voice of a little boy behind the fire door on the 19th floor landing. Grant pushed the door open and froze. A young Omega immediately stood between him and the child. "Please," the Omega said, keeping his voice low. "He has school in 5 hours. Just let him sleep until morning." Grant said nothing at first. The landing was clean, but someone had carefully transformed one corner into a temporary sleeping space. 2 coats had been folded across the concrete floor. A backpack rested against the wall beside 2 bottles of water, a paper grocery bag, and a pair of children's sneakers placed neatly together. The boy, perhaps 6 years old, sat beneath an oversized jacket with sleepy eyes fixed on Grant. "What are you doing here?" Grant asked. The Omega glanced toward the child. "Keeping him warm." "That is not what I asked." "I know." Grant recognized fear in the man's expression, but there was something else beneath it. Pride. "What is your name?" "Caleb Foster." He hesitated. "My son is Eli." Grant looked at the boy. Eli gave him a cautious wave. "Hi." "Hello, Eli." Grant returned his attention to Caleb. "This building closes to the public at 10. "I know." "Then you know you cannot stay here." Caleb swallowed. "I know that too." Grant reached for his phone. Caleb stepped forward, then stopped himself. "Please do not call security yet." Grant's gaze sharpened. "Why?" "Because Eli thinks we are camping." Silence filled the stairwell. Grant slowly lowered his phone. Eli shifted beneath the jacket. "Dad said this building has the best indoor campsite in Manhattan." Caleb closed his eyes for one painful second. Grant looked around again, and details he had initially dismissed began to mean something different. Eli's school clothes were folded neatly beside the backpack. A toothbrush sat inside a plastic sandwich bag. Caleb had placed his own coat beneath his son, while keeping only a thin sweater for himself. On the wall beside Eli was a sheet of notebook paper covered with 4 small drawings: a moon, another moon, another moon, and a 4th moon colored blue. "What is that?" Grant asked. Eli brightened. "Our camping calendar. Dad said I could draw 1 moon every night." Grant looked at Caleb. Caleb could no longer meet his eyes. "For nights?" Grant asked quietly. Caleb nodded. "You have been sleeping in my stairwell for 4 nights. Only after the building gets quiet. We leave before 6 every morning." "Where do you go?" Eli goes to school. "I go wherever I can until pickup." Grant stared at him. "And then you come back here?" Caleb nodded again. There was no request for money, no dramatic explanation, only exhaustion carefully held behind a calm expression because a 6-year-old was watching. Eli yawned. Caleb immediately turned and pulled the jacket higher around his shoulders. "Go back to sleep, buddy." "Are we in trouble?" Eli asked. Caleb hesitated. Grant saw the answer forming and interrupted. "No." Caleb looked at him in surprise. Grant slipped his phone back into his pocket. "Nobody is in trouble tonight." Eli relaxed against the wall. Grant looked at the cold concrete landing, then at Caleb. "But your son is not spending a 5th night here." Caleb's face tightened. "Mister, I am not asking you for anything." Grant held his gaze. "I know. That is exactly why I am asking what happened." Grant did not get an answer immediately. Caleb returned to the corner and began gathering their few belongings as though preparing to leave before Grant could change his mind. Eli watched from beneath the jacket, still fighting sleep. "You do not have to pack yet," Grant said. Caleb stopped. "You said we cannot stay." "I said your son is not spending another night in a stairwell." "Those sound like the same thing." Grant understood why Caleb heard a threat where he intended a solution. "There is an employee rest suite on the 22nd floor. It has a couch, a private bathroom, and a door that locks. You can use it until morning." Caleb looked suspicious. "Why?" "Because it is 2 in the morning and he is 6. Eli raised one hand. "I am almost 7. Grant glanced at him. "My apologies." Eli smiled sleepily. Caleb did not. "What happens in the morning?" "We figure that out in the morning." Caleb considered the offer before finally nodding. "One night." "One night," Grant agreed. Caleb packed everything into the backpack and grocery bag. He carried most of it himself, leaving Eli with only his school bag. Grant noticed that too. On the 22nd floor, Eli stared at the rest suite as though they had entered a hotel. Dad, look. A shower. Caleb smiled for his son's sake. I see it. Grant found clean towels in a cabinet and ordered breakfast from a 24-hour diner nearby. When the food arrived, Caleb tried to refuse his portion until Eli asked him to eat with them. They sat around a small table while Eli explained their camping adventure between bites of pancakes. We leave before everybody comes to work, he said proudly. Dad knows which doors nobody uses. Grant looked at Caleb. How? Caleb lowered his coffee. I used to work here. For Whitmore Development. For a company that rented space on the 19th floor. Administrative support. They moved operations to New Jersey about 3 months ago. And you knew the stairwell stayed quiet. Caleb nodded. I knew the evening cleaning schedule. I knew the cameras were mostly positioned at the elevator entrances and main corridors. I was not trying to steal anything. I did not say you were. People usually think it. Grant leaned back. How did you get inside after hours? We did not. We came in before the lobby closed and stayed out of sight. Caleb looked embarrassed admitting it. Grant glanced at Eli, who was concentrating on cutting a pancake into perfect squares. Does his school know? Know what? That you do not have housing. Caleb's expression changed instantly. No. Why not? Because Eli is doing well. He has perfect attendance. His teacher thinks we are between apartments. Grant chose his next words carefully. I have a chief operating officer named Rebecca Sloan. She works with several family housing organizations through our community development programs. I can call her in the morning. Caleb went still. Housing organizations? Emergency family placement? Temporary housing? Rental assistance? And social services? Grant heard the fear immediately. Possibly, depending on the program. Caleb pushed his chair back. No. Eli looked up. Caleb softened his voice. Finish breakfast, buddy. Grant waited until Eli returned his attention to the pancakes. Caleb, nobody is suggesting you have done anything wrong. You do not know how quickly people decide that needing help means you cannot take care of your own child. Then tell me what you need. Caleb looked at Eli for a long moment. A safe place for him to sleep. Enough time for me to get back on my feet. That is all. Grant nodded. Then we start there. Caleb studied him, uncertain whether to trust the promise. Grant stood to leave them some privacy, but Caleb spoke before he reached the door. Mr. Whitmore. Grant turned. Caleb had finally recognized him. I know who you are now. Does that change anything? Caleb shook his head. No, but if you really want to help, please remember something. Grant waited. Caleb looked toward his son. Whatever happens tomorrow, do not make him think I abandoned him. Grant carried Caleb's final sentence with him into the morning. By 7:30, Eli had showered, changed into the carefully folded school clothes from his backpack, and eaten the rest of his pancakes. Caleb looked exhausted, but every time Eli glanced toward him, he smiled as though the night had been completely ordinary. Grant watched them from the doorway and understood something he had missed in the stairwell. Caleb was not afraid of being uncomfortable. He was afraid that someone would interpret hardship as failure and decide Eli would be better off without him. Your car is downstairs, Grant said. Caleb looked up. My car. A company driver can take Eli to school. We can take the subway. You can. The offer is still there. Caleb hesitated before looking at the clock. The subway might make him late. Eli immediately raised his backpack. I have never been driven to school by a company driver. Caleb sighed. Please do not tell your classmates that like it is a field trip. Grant almost smiled. He will take both of you. You can walk Eli inside. That detail mattered. Caleb nodded. After they left, Grant called Rebecca Sloan and asked her to meet him in his office. Rebecca arrived 20 minutes later with a tablet and several questions. Grant explained only what was necessary. A father and his 6-year-old son need temporary housing. They stay together. That is the priority. Rebecca studied him. Do they have identification? Yes. Employment? Not currently. Any immediate medical concerns? None that I know of. Then there are options, but I cannot promise placement today. Grant frowned. Book a hotel until something opens. That solves tonight. It does not solve next week. Then book a month. Rebecca lowered the tablet. Grant, if you want to help him, do not turn his life into one of your acquisitions. He looked at her. I am trying to keep a child out of a stairwell. Good. Then ask the father what he will accept. By 9:30, Caleb had returned. Grant expected relief when Rebecca explained the options. Instead, Caleb became increasingly tense as forms, eligibility requirements, and program procedures entered the conversation. Would anyone contact Eli's school? He asked. Rebecca answered carefully. Not automatically. Would anyone question whether he should stay with me? The programs I am discussing are designed to keep families housed together. Caleb looked toward Grant. Designed to is not the same as guaranteed. Grant understood the distinction. What are you afraid will happen? Caleb's hands tightened around the strap of his backpack. 4 nights ago, I had an apartment application pending. 2 days ago, I thought I could stretch what I had left until Friday. Last night, my son slept on my coat. Things can change very quickly. That does not answer my question. Caleb finally met his eyes. I am afraid somebody will look at where we slept and decide that is the only thing they need to know about me. The room went quiet. Caleb continued. Check my name. Check my work history. Check Eli's school attendance. Check whatever you legally need to check. I have never stopped taking care of him. Grant leaned forward. Nobody here is accusing you of that. Not yet. Rebecca closed her tablet. Caleb, I can contact a family housing partner that has private temporary units. You and Eli would stay together. Participation is voluntary. We can explain every form before you sign anything. Caleb looked at her. No surprises? No surprises. He took a slow breath. Then I will listen. 2 hours later, Rebecca confirmed that a furnished studio apartment in Queens could be available that evening for an initial 7-day emergency placement. Grant expected Caleb to celebrate. Instead, the Omega asked the question that mattered most to him. Can Eli have his own key? Rebecca smiled gently. We can arrange too. Caleb looked down for a moment, gathering himself. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. Then yes. Grant realized the most powerful thing he had offered Caleb was not money, transportation, or influence. It was a door the man could close at night without wondering who might open it. The temporary apartment was on the 3rd floor of a modest brick building in Queens, 20 minutes from Eli's school by subway. It was small, with one main room, a narrow kitchen, and a bathroom with a stubborn faucet, but Caleb stood inside the doorway as though Rebecca had handed him the keys to something far greater. Eli ran to the window and announced that he could see a basketball court across the street. Caleb checked the lock twice before setting down their backpack. Grant had come only because Rebecca needed several program documents delivered before the housing office closed. He remained near the door, careful not to turn Caleb's first safe room in days into another place dominated by his presence. The placement is confirmed for 7 nights, Rebecca explained. Tomorrow we can begin discussing longer-term options. Caleb nodded. 7 nights is enough to breathe. Grant looked around the nearly empty kitchen. You need groceries. I can handle groceries. Caleb, you have been living out of a paper bag. And now I have a refrigerator. Grant recognized the boundary, but ignored it long enough to make one more attempt. I can arrange a prepaid card for food and transportation. Caleb turned toward him. No, there would be no repayment. That is not what worries me. Eli was busy examining the apartment, so Caleb lowered his voice. You found us in your building. You gave us somewhere safe to sleep. Rebecca found this place. I am grateful for all of that. Then why refuse something that would make the next week easier? Caleb held the apartment key in his palm. Because easier can become complicated very quickly when one person has everything and the other person has nothing. Grant said nothing. Caleb continued. I need somewhere safe tonight. I do not need to become somebody you own tomorrow. The words landed harder than Caleb intended. I am not trying to own you. I know, but you are used to solving problems by paying for them. Grant glanced at Rebecca. Her expression told him Caleb had reached the same conclusion she had. Then tell me what help looks like, Grant said. Caleb seemed surprised by the question. Information. Time. A fair chance to work again. You need employment. Yes. What kind? Administrative support. Scheduling, vendor coordination, records, office operations. I did all of it for 6 years. Grant immediately thought of 3 openings inside Whitmore Development, but he stopped himself before offering one. Do you have a resume? On my phone and in cloud storage. Rebecca can send you legitimate listings through our employment partners. Caleb nodded. That I will accept. Grant felt strangely satisfied by the answer, not because Caleb had finally taken something from him, but because he had defined the terms himself. Eli returned holding the second key Rebecca had given him. Dad, is this really mine? Caleb crouched beside him. For this week, yes. Can I keep it in my backpack? Only if you promise not to lose it. Eli closed his fist around the key. I promise. Grant watched Caleb's expression soften. There was relief there, but also determination. The next morning, Rebecca emailed Grant after speaking with the housing coordinator. Caleb had already submitted 4 job applications before 8. By lunchtime, he had submitted 3 more. That evening, Grant received a message from Caleb for the first time. It contained only 2 sentences. Eli made it to school on time. Thank you for giving us a night where he did not have to pretend we were camping. Grant read the message twice before replying. You do not owe me thanks. Caleb's response came several minutes later. I know. That is why I meant it. Grant set down his phone and realized something had shifted. He had started the week believing Caleb needed rescuing. Caleb was beginning to teach him that what he needed was room to stand on his own. By the 5th day, Caleb had turned the small apartment into something that almost resembled a routine. Eli woke at 6:30, ate cereal at the narrow kitchen counter, and checked his backpack twice before they walked to the subway. Caleb spent the hours between school drop-off and pickup applying for jobs from the public library. He kept a spreadsheet on his phone with every application, contact name, and follow-up date. Grant learned this from Rebecca, not from Caleb. 7 applications became 14, Rebecca told him. 2 interviews scheduled. 3 rejections. Grant looked up from his desk. Why did nobody hire him after 6 years of administrative experience? Because a gap in employment raises questions, and because he no longer has the professional references he once had. His previous company relocated, his former supervisor retired, and several people he worked with moved on. Grant leaned back. There has to be more to what happened. Rebecca gave him a warning look. Then ask him. Do not investigate his life because you are curious. That evening, Grant visited the Queen's building to deliver paperwork extending Caleb's temporary placement by another 2 weeks. Caleb invited him inside and offered coffee made in a machine that looked older than both of them. Eli sat at the table doing math homework. 2 more weeks, Grant said, handing Caleb the papers. Relief crossed Caleb's face. That gives me time. Rebecca said you have interviews. Tuesday and Thursday. Good. Grant hesitated. Can I ask you something? Caleb smiled faintly. You usually do. What happened after your company moved? Caleb sat across from him. They offered me a position in New Jersey. The commute would have added almost 3 hours to my day, and Eli's after-school program ended at 6. I could not make both work. So you resigned? I tried temporary office work first. Then the hours became unpredictable. I fell behind on rent. Caleb looked toward Eli before continuing more quietly. I used my savings. Then I sold what I could. We moved into a motel because I thought it would be for 1 week. How long? Almost a month. And then the stairwell. Caleb nodded. Grant struggled with the simplicity of it. He had expected one catastrophic event. Instead, Caleb's life had narrowed one practical problem at a time until there was nowhere left to step. Why did you not ask anyone? Grant asked. Caleb's expression changed. I did. Grant waited. Some people offered advice I had already tried. Some stopped answering. One person offered to let Eli stay with them, but not me. Grant understood immediately why Caleb had refused. After a while, Caleb continued. Every conversation started with what I had lost. Nobody asked what I could still do. Grant looked at the spreadsheet open on Caleb's phone. 14 applications. Follow-up dates. Interview notes. You are still doing a lot. Caleb gave a tired smile. That is the part people stop seeing. Because they see that you need help. Exactly. Caleb folded his hands. When people see you at your lowest point, sometimes they decide that point explains your entire life. Grant remembered the stairwell, the folded school clothes, the coat beneath Eli, and the 4 moons on the paper. He had seen vulnerability first too. I did that, he admitted. Caleb looked surprised. When I found you, I thought I needed to solve your situation. You did help. That is different. Grant nodded toward the phone. I did not ask what you were already doing to solve it yourself. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Eli approached carrying his math worksheet. Dad, I need help with fractions. Caleb immediately pulled out the chair beside him. Come here. Grant watched father and son work through the problem together. Before leaving, he paused at the door. Caleb, yes. I am going to stop asking what I can give you. Caleb raised an eyebrow. What are you going to ask instead? Grant considered it. What door would you open if someone finally gave you a fair chance to reach it? Caleb looked toward Eli, then back at Grant. A job with hours that let me be his father. Grant nodded. For the first time, he knew exactly what kind of help to look for without deciding the rest of Caleb's life for him. The next morning, Caleb woke to an apartment that was too quiet. For one peaceful second, he assumed Eli was in the bathroom. Then he noticed the boy's sneakers were gone. Eli. Caleb checked the bathroom, the narrow kitchen, and the closet, even though he knew none of them could hide a 6-year-old for long. His eyes landed on the counter. Eli's spare key was missing. Caleb grabbed his phone and rushed into the hallway. Downstairs, the building manager looked up from his desk. Have you seen my son? The little boy with the blue backpack? He came through about 10 minutes ago. Caleb's heart dropped. Was he alone? Yes. He said he was meeting someone in the lobby. Caleb turned and saw Eli sitting near the front windows beside Grant Whitmore. Relief arrived so quickly that Caleb had to stop walking for a moment. Grant noticed him immediately and stood. He is safe. Caleb crossed the lobby. Eli Foster, you do not leave the apartment without telling me. Eli lowered his head. I am sorry. Caleb crouched in front of him. I am not angry. I need to know where you are. Always. I wanted to ask Mr. Whitmore something. Caleb looked at Grant. How did he know you were here? I did not know he knew. I came to meet Rebecca about the housing extension. Grant glanced at Eli. He saw me through the lobby window. Caleb exhaled slowly. What was so important that it could not wait? Eli twisted one backpack strap around his fingers. I heard you talking last night. Caleb went still. Talking about what? The apartment. Eli looked at Grant. Dad said we only have 2 more weeks. Caleb's expression softened. Buddy, that does not mean we are going back to the stairwell. But where do we go when the room ends? Caleb opened his mouth, then stopped. He had spent every day protecting Eli from uncertainty, never realizing the boy had learned to recognize it anyway. Grant sat down again, so he was closer to Eli's height. Your dad is working very hard to figure that out. Eli frowned. What if he cannot? Grant looked toward Caleb before answering. Then the adults helping him keep looking for another safe option. Nobody is sending you back to that stairwell. Promise. Grant did not answer immediately. Caleb appreciated that. I can promise we will not stop looking for solutions, Grant said. Eli considered this and nodded. Caleb sat beside his son. You knew we were not camping, did you? Eli stared at his sneakers. After the second night, Caleb's face fell. Why did you pretend? Because you wanted me to think it was fun. The answer left Caleb speechless. Eli leaned against him. I did not want you to feel bad. Caleb wrapped an arm around his shoulders. Grant looked away for a moment, giving them privacy without leaving. Later, after Eli had gone to school, Grant and Caleb stood outside the building. I thought I was protecting him, Caleb said. You were. He was protecting me too. Grant nodded. Children notice more than adults want them to. Caleb looked exhausted. I cannot keep asking him to live from one deadline to another. Grant reached into his coat pocket and removed a folded sheet of paper. Then I may have something worth considering. Caleb immediately became cautious. What? One of our nonprofit housing partners has an opening for an administrative coordinator. Regular weekday hours. Your experience matches the requirements. Caleb looked at the paper but did not take it. Did you create this job? No. Did you tell them to hire me? No. Would they know you sent me? Grant answered carefully. They would know Rebecca forwarded your application through an employment partnership. Nothing more. Caleb finally accepted the page. And if I interview badly? Then you do not get the job. Caleb looked up, surprised. Grant gave him a small smile. You asked for a fair chance, not a favor. Caleb read the first few lines. For the first time that morning, uncertainty in his expression gave way to determination. When is the application due? Tomorrow at 5. Caleb folded the paper carefully. Then I have work to do. Caleb submitted the application at 4:17 the next afternoon. He had rewritten his resume twice, checked every date, and asked Rebecca to review the formatting but not the content. When she suggested changing one sentence to make his experience sound more impressive, Caleb shook his head. I want them to hire the person who actually shows up. 3 days later, an email arrived inviting him to interview with Harbor Bridge Housing, the nonprofit partner Grant had mentioned. The interview was scheduled for Monday morning at 10. Caleb read the message several times before showing Eli. Does this mean you have a job? Eli asked. It means they want to talk to me about one. Are you good at talking? Caleb smiled. That depends on who you ask. On Monday, He wore the same navy shirt he had once used for office meetings and borrowed an iron from the building manager. Rebecca had arranged nothing beyond forwarding his application. Grant had deliberately stayed away. Caleb appreciated that more than he expected. At Harbor Bridge, he met with two managers who asked about scheduling systems, vendor coordination, record keeping, and handling competing deadlines. For 40 minutes, nobody asked where he had slept 2 weeks earlier. Nobody mentioned the stairwell. They asked what he knew. Caleb answered. When one interviewer asked about the gap in his employment, he told the truth without turning his life into an apology. My previous employer relocated. I spent several months taking temporary work while remaining responsible for my son's school schedule. I am looking for stable weekday hours where I can use the administrative experience I already have. The manager nodded and moved to the next question. Caleb almost laughed from relief. Afterward, he walked 6 blocks before calling Rebecca. How did it go? She asked. I do not know. That usually means it went better than you think. They treated me like an applicant. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. That was the point. Caleb thanked her and ended the call. He did not call Grant. Grant had made it clear that the rest had to belong to Caleb, and Caleb wanted the result to belong to him too. 2 days passed without news. Then 3. On Thursday afternoon, Harbor Bridge requested a second interview. This time they gave Caleb a practical exercise. Reorganize a fictional week schedule after 2 staff absences, 3 tenant appointments, and an urgent vendor inspection all landed on the same day. Caleb finished with 8 minutes remaining and explained every decision. That evening, Grant received a message from him. Second interview finished. No result yet. Grant replied, good. Whatever happens, you earned the interview. Caleb stared at those words longer than he expected. The next morning, Harbor Bridge called. Mr. Foster, we would like to offer you the administrative coordinator position. Caleb stopped breathing for a second. I am sorry. Could you repeat that? The woman laughed warmly and did. The salary was modest but steady. The hours ended early enough for Caleb to pick up Eli from his after-school program. Health coverage began after the probationary period. Most importantly, the offer came directly from Harbor Bridge, not Grant. Caleb accepted. When Eli came home, Caleb placed a folded piece of paper on the kitchen counter. Remember when you asked where we go when this room ends? Eli nodded cautiously. Caleb crouched beside him. I got the job. Eli's eyes widened. The real job. Caleb laughed. The very real job. Eli threw his arms around him. Later that evening, Caleb called Grant. They hired me. There was a brief silence before Grant answered. Congratulations. You do not sound surprised. I am not. Caleb smiled. You could at least pretend. Grant laughed softly. Fine. I am completely shocked that a qualified man performed well in a fair interview. Caleb looked around the tiny apartment that had given them room to breathe. Thank you for opening the door. Grant's answer came quietly. You walk through it yourself. Caleb looked at the key resting beside Eli's school backpack. For the first time in months, the next deadline ahead of him did not feel like the edge of something ending. It felt like the beginning of something he had earned. Caleb's first paycheck arrived 3 weeks after he started at Harbor Bridge Housing, and he stared at the deposit notification on his phone until Eli asked if something was wrong. Nothing is wrong, Caleb said, smiling. For once, something is very right. The emergency placement had already been extended while Caleb completed his first weeks of employment, and with Rebecca's help navigating the program requirements, he qualified for a transitional apartment with a longer lease. It was still in Queens, still close enough to Eli's school, but it had a separate bedroom, a small living room, and a kitchen window that caught the afternoon sun. On moving day, Caleb arrived carrying 2 boxes while Eli carried one containing almost nothing except books and the paper with 4 moons he had drawn in the stairwell. Grant met them outside only because Caleb had invited him. That mattered to both of them. You brought no moving crew? Grant asked. Caleb looked at the 2 boxes. This is the moving crew. Grant smiled and picked up the heavier box without asking. Upstairs, the housing coordinator handed Caleb 2 keys. Caleb took one and placed the other in Eli's palm. Eli stared at it with the same seriousness he had shown when receiving the temporary key weeks earlier. Is this one really ours? Yes. For more than 7 days? Caleb nodded. A lot more than 7 days. Eli looked toward the front door. Does this mean nobody can tell us to leave tonight? Caleb's smile disappeared for a moment. He crouched beside his son and closed Eli's fingers around the key. Yes, buddy. This one is ours. Eli hugged him so suddenly that Caleb nearly lost his balance. Grant stood several feet away and said nothing. He understood that this moment belonged to them. Later, after Eli claimed the bedroom and began arranging books along the windowsill, Caleb found Grant in the kitchen attempting to assemble a small table they had bought from a neighborhood thrift store. "You are holding the instructions upside down," Caleb said. Grant turned the page around. "I was testing whether you were paying attention." Of course. They worked together until the table finally stood without wobbling. Caleb made grilled cheese sandwiches for dinner because they were inexpensive, easy, and Eli's favorite. For the first time, Grant sat at Caleb's table because Caleb had asked him to. There were no assistants, company drivers, housing forms, or unanswered questions about tomorrow. Eli talked about school, while Caleb laughed at his stories, and Grant found himself listening more than speaking. After Eli went to his room, Caleb carried 2 coffee mugs to the small living room. "I have been trying to figure out how to thank you," he said. Grant shook his head. "You already did. I mean properly." "Then do not." Caleb studied him. "Why?" "Because I do not want gratitude to become the reason you keep me in your life." The honesty surprised them both. Caleb slowly set down his mug. "Then why are you here?" Grant glanced toward Eli's room. "Because you invited me." "That is not what I meant." Grant met his eyes. "I know." He paused before continuing. "Somewhere between the stairwell and watching you rebuild everything, I stopped wondering whether you needed me. I started wondering whether there might be room for me when you did not." Caleb was quiet for several seconds. There was no pressure in Grant's words, no expectation disguised as generosity. That made Caleb smile. "There might be." Grant smiled back. Caleb picked up his new apartment key from the table and turned it between his fingers. Weeks earlier, every locked door had belonged to someone else. Now this one belonged to him. He had earned the paycheck, signed the housing agreement, and chosen the people sitting at his table. When Grant finally stood to leave, Caleb walked him to the door. "Dinner next Friday?" he asked. Grant looked surprised. "Are you inviting me back?" Caleb opened the door and smiled. "I am deciding who gets to come through it. There is a difference." 1 year later, Caleb stood inside Whitmore Development headquarters holding a visitor badge instead of wondering how long he could remain unnoticed. Harbor Bridge Housing was hosting its annual partnership event there, and Caleb had been asked to speak about how stable employment and temporary housing could help families rebuild without taking away their independence. He had almost refused. Then Eli told him he should do it because he was good at talking now. Grant sat near the back of the room and listened as Caleb spoke about dignity, opportunity, and the difference between opening a door for someone and deciding where they should walk afterward. Caleb never turned his experience into a tragedy. He spoke about rebuilding. His position at Harbor Bridge had become permanent months earlier, and he had recently received additional responsibilities coordinating employment resources for families facing housing instability. Eli was thriving in school and had finally stopped keeping his apartment key inside his backpack at all times. He left it on the hook beside the front door because he no longer needed constant proof that they had somewhere to return to. Grant had become part of that routine slowly. Friday dinners became regular. Sometimes he helped Eli with homework. Sometimes Caleb and Grant drank coffee after Eli went to bed and talked until neither noticed the time. Nothing about their relationship had been purchased, arranged, or rushed. Grant had learned to wait for invitations. Caleb had learned that accepting someone's presence did not mean surrendering his independence. After the event, Eli ran toward them carrying a cookie from the refreshment table. "Can we see it?" he asked. Caleb knew immediately what he meant. "Are you sure?" Eli nodded. Grant quietly followed them to the stairwell. They climbed to the 19th floor and stopped before the familiar fire door. Caleb opened it. The landing looked smaller than he remembered. The concrete walls were unchanged, and the fluorescent lights still gave the space a pale glow, but there were no coats on the floor, no grocery bag against the wall, and no 4 moons drawn on notebook paper. Eli stepped into the corner where they had once slept. "This is where we camped," he said. Caleb looked at him. "That was not camping, buddy." Eli gave him a knowing smile. "I know." Caleb blinked. "You knew then, too. After the second night. You never told me." Eli shrugged. "You were trying really hard." Caleb laughed softly, though his eyes had grown bright. "I was." Eli reached for his hand. "You did good, Dad." Those 4 words affected Caleb more deeply than any speech he had given upstairs. He squeezed his son's hand. So did you. Grant remained near the door, allowing the moment to belong to them. Caleb noticed and remembered another night in this same stairwell, when Grant had been a stranger with a phone in his hand and enough power to change everything. What mattered now was that he had learned not to. He had offered opportunities, then allowed Caleb to choose. Eli tugged Caleb toward the door. Can we go home? I am hungry. We can. Caleb started walking, then stopped beside Grant. For a moment, he looked at the alpha who had found them at their lowest point, but had never demanded to become the center of their recovery. Caleb extended his free hand. Grant looked at it, then at him. Are you sure? Caleb smiled. I have been sure for a while. Grant took his hand. Together, the three of them left the stairwell. Later that evening, Caleb unlocked his own front door while Eli rushed inside to decide what they should order for dinner. Grant waited in the hallway as he always did until Caleb stepped aside. Come in, Caleb said. Grant crossed the threshold. Caleb closed the door behind them and turned the key. Once, that sound had represented something he feared losing. Now it meant safety, choice, and home. Caleb looked at Eli laughing in the kitchen, then at Grant standing beside him, and understood how completely his life had changed. He had not been rescued into someone else's world. He had rebuilt his own, and now he was free to choose who shared it.